Hi, welcome to lesson. Thank you for joining me. The past couple of weeks we have been discussing in science how scientists classify different organisms. You all have had the fun of sorting your buttons and classifying them according to traits that you felt like they had in common. We've also kind of briefly gone over the animal kingdom, fungi, archaebacteria, protists, all sorts of really interesting living organisms. Today we're going to be briefly going over the animal kingdom. I do have these wonderful charts that I'm going to be using during the lesson, and I would love for you to explore with them after the lesson as well. So let's talk about things that live in the animal kingdom, organisms, living creatures, right? Does anyone know something they might have in common, creatures that live in the animal kingdom? Yes, they have many cells. They're multicellular, that's right. Oh yes, they can't make their own food like some other creatures that we've been learning about. They have to capture their food, that's right, to get their energy. Well, we're going to start with one of the most simple animals, and in the animal kingdom, we have these large groups called phylums. Do you remember that when we talked about the different divisions of living things? Yes. The first phylum we're going to talk about today is Porifera. This was a living creature at one point, and now I'm basically holding a type of exoskeleton. Yes, it's a sponge. It's squishy. You might use them to wash your dishes or your body even. But this was a living creature at one point, one of the most simple animals to exist. They don't have any eyeballs or hearts or anything like that, do they? But they did eat, and they eat through filtering the currents in the water to get what they need for their nutrients. This particular sponge, which is in the phylum Porifera, came from Tarpon Springs, which is a city here in Florida. There's a really big Greek population, and it's a fishing village, and a lot of the people there do sponge diving, and that's where I got this Porifera example for you today. Here, I'll let you hold it. You can pass that around. And then as we get more complex, we do have our next phylum, which is Cnidaria. Let me get my Cnidaria example out. I have it here in my pocket. Do you recognize this? Yeah, it's a piece of coral. Now what I'm showing you right now is again kind of like a skeleton. It's not the living creature at all. And in fact, the coral that lives and makes these habitats can float freely when they're reproducing. And in fact, most Cnidaria do. Some other examples of Cnidarians are jellyfish. We've got sea anemones and hydra, and of course corals. Again, you don't really see any complex body systems. They do have to eat, but they don't have a circulatory system or anything like that. Again, they're mostly filter feeders, although some can kind of reach out and grab their food and have stinging parts. After Cnidarians, we've got Platyhelminthes. And I don't have an example of that today, but these are like your tapeworms and flatworms and flukes. They have bilateral symmetry, which means they can be cut down the middle and they can mirror each side. Again, very simple creatures. They do have digestive systems, but no circulatory systems or anything complex like that. Our next phylum is Mollusca. You might recognize these mollusks. You can find them on the beach as well. Sometimes they're called bivalves because they have two parts. Now, again, these aren't living specimens. These are just the skeletons, and we call these seashells. They're made of calcium carbonate. But inside, there did live a little creature, and mostly a mucousy, soft-bodied creature. But they can flap these open and close to move and be mobile and swim. More of a filter feeder as well. And after that, we have our annelids, which are earthworms. Let me show you some pictures. You might recognize earthworms if you've ever gone digging in the garden or gone fishing and used them as bait. Very simple creatures as well. They do start to have a circulatory system though, so we've kind of reached our first animal that's complex enough to have a circulatory system. After that, we've got some nematodes. These are microscopic worms. They're very tiny, and they live in the soil in your yard, and they like to eat the roots of plants. They're very kind of not fun creatures if you like your yard to be nice and green and the grass to grow, but they're here for a reason. My favorite phylum is Arthropoda. I do have an arthropod for you here today. This arthropod takes the form of an insect that's in the Coleoptera, and it's a beetle. It's a type of beetle called a weevil. I love weevils. I think they're so cool looking. And Arthropoda also has crustaceans like crabs and arachnids like spiders. It's a very diverse phylum. After that, we have our Echinodermata. These are echinoderms, and they have not a bilateral symmetry, but they have a radial symmetry. So they have a symmetry that can be multiple ways of reflecting and mirroring itself. This is another example of kind of the exoskeleton of the creature that was once living. They would typically have all these little legs coming off of them, the spines that help them to move. This would be their mouth part. Very cool looking animals. And then last but not least, we have our chordates, our chordata. And these are all the animals that you're probably really excited to start studying. You've got fish and mammals and all these wonderful creatures that now are pretty complex. They have circulatory systems and nervous systems and spinal cords, and they're also known as vertebrates. Now we will get into the different classes of chordata in the next coming weeks, but for now I want you to explore the invertebrates of the animal kingdom. We have this chart you can look at. You can choose to do research on a specific animal. I also have a blank chart if you and a few friends want to recreate some of your favorite facts, draw some pictures, and do some further research. Please remember to always cite your sources. Do you have any questions? Well, thank you for attending lesson.